Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Martin. I'm the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, also known as APSCUF. I want to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon on student debt, and I also want to do just a quick disclaimer. We're in the process of moving to Harrisburg, so I'm working from home. So if you hear somebody else talking behind me, it's our African gray parrot. So just do that, and I'll put myself back on mute as soon as I can. I think probably most of us know that Pennsylvania ranks near the bottom of every measure of funding for public higher education. And as a result, our colleges and universities are some of the most expensive in the nation. And in fact, the Pennsylvania state system of higher education, I believe, is the most expensive state-funded system in the country. As a result, Pennsylvania college students have the highest student loan debt in the country, with an average of about $37,000 owed. And the total debt is somewhere around $68 billion. So this is clearly an important issue. So the purpose of today's webinar is to allow for you to hear the findings of a recent report that was conducted by Morning Consult. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean Crampsey, who's the Director of Government Relations at APSCUF. Sean?
Thank you so much, Jamie. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. As Jamie mentioned, we are going to release a survey that was done on Pennsylvania student debt, done by Morning Consult. I wanted to thank them as well as the Center for Responsible Lending for making this project happen and for putting this work product together. It's very good information. It's unfortunately sad information that we're going to get into, but I think it's very important for Pennsylvania to look at this poll, look at this polling, and really take a hard look at what our legislative solutions are, both statewide and federally. So in a moment, I'm going to share my screen so we can go through the slides. If anyone has any questions, feel free to use the chat box to type those in as we go, and we will get to those at the end. Also, as a reminder, we are recording this Zoom meeting so we can share it with those in the media and some of our other legislative partners who are working on student debt issues. So with that, I am going to share my screen. All right. So as I mentioned, this poll is commissioned by Morning Consult in partnership with the Center for Responsible Lending. We're presenting it to you today. The poll was put out the first week of June, so June 2nd to June 8th. The poll covered 415 PA student borrowers who are in repayment. There were borrowers who were excluded from the sample size if they indicated they were currently students. But all other borrowers were included. So the sample size does include borrowers who maybe have a $0 payment at this time, borrowers who are behind or in default, and also borrowers who are making their regularly scheduled payments. So we're going to go through 5 different pieces of this data. The first is timely for us, and is the COVID-19 financial impacts on borrowers in Pennsylvania. So some of the key points, the first key point is nearly a quarter, so about 23% of Pennsylvania borrowers reported they are required to work from home, and then 38% report that their hours have been reduced or that they've been laid off or furloughed. So when we're talking about those big COVID-19 impacts, this obviously plays into the student debt issues that we already had in the state of Pennsylvania. People of color, at 51% are disproportionately experiencing decreases in household incomes due to COVID. 60% of those PA borrowers reported that they're just able to cover their monthly expenses, but would have trouble with an unexpected emergency. Obviously, again, that is timely. We're living with COVID-19, and as jobs become furloughed or people get laid off, that obviously could be an unexpected emergency, as well as getting sick. And then of that 60%, we actually see 15 points higher at 75% for people of color who report that they can just cover their monthly expenses but would have trouble with an unexpected emergency. About a third of those surveyed, so 33% over the past year, have been contacted by a debt collector. A third, or 35%, were not aware that the CARES Act impacted their loans, with 25% of those saying they were not aware at all. So this is a big issue that we're going to get into a little bit later within the data, but really concerning for us to see a number that high of folks that were unaware that the CARES Act either impacted student loans in general or their specific loans. And then nearly 2/3 of student borrowers across the political spectrum strongly support reducing student loan debt by $20,000 or eliminating student loan interest for all federal loans. So we're going to close out with the policy issues that were pulled, and you'll see when we finish up that those issues pulled very high in Pennsylvania, with some strong support for some initiatives that we think are vital. All right. So we mentioned that borrowers were being impacted because of COVID-19 with their work environments. So you see here, 24% said their work life has not changed, but 23% are now working from home. 21% have seen their hours reduced, and 17% have been furloughed. So that's that 38% block that we're really concerned with, either less hours or being furloughed or laid off from their jobs due to COVID. Those borrowers eventually are still going to have to return to making payments. So that's a big concern for us. 40% of student loan borrowers reported a decrease in their household income, while 43% said there was no change. 15% actually saw a slight increase, but really concerning for us is that 40% number of folks that saw a significant or somewhat decrease in their household income. Obviously, that's very concerning for those that are trying to make student loan payments. Then when we break it down by income, and then white borrowers versus borrowers of color, this is where that 51% comes into play that I mentioned early on. So we saw a total decrease in household income of 51% among borrowers of color. Of the income that is under $50,000, we saw a 41% decrease, and then incomes over $75,000, we actually saw a 44% decrease in household income. And we're going to talk a little bit also about how the borrowers are struggling to keep up. So obviously those COVID impacts are playing a huge role right now, and we still see borrowers even coming out of COVID that are going to struggle to keep up. So only 26% of borrowers say that they are regularly saving to meet their future needs, while the other 71% say they will have trouble with unexpected emergencies, or they're already falling behind. So I mentioned that big 60% block that if they had an emergency would struggle to cover their student loans. We also have 11% who are already falling behind and struggling to make ends meet, and just 26% who said they were actually able to cover their regular monthly expenses. Then we broke that down, and you can see, again, this is that 75%. People of color are 15 points more likely to report that they can cover their monthly expenses, but would have an issue with an unexpected emergency. That's compared to 56% among white borrowers. And then you also see that number is pretty high with those making under $50,000. So that's a 60% that tracked with the overall number. And as we mentioned early on, 1/3 of borrowers have reported being contacted by a debt collector in the past 12 months. Obviously, that number is concerning. That's the past 12 months. So those are debt collectors that were contacting in theory before COVID. That number is probably only going to grow as we get out of that CARES Act grace period that ends in September. And then when we broke this down, again, this is a super concerning number for us. When you look at those who are being contacted by debt collectors, those making under $50,000 were contacted at a 47% level. You compare that with those who make over $75,000 who were only contacted at a 19% level. So a huge discrepancy there. And then a 10-point difference between people of color versus white borrowers at 41% compared to 31% being contacted by debt collectors. And then we broke it down into the courses of actions that borrowers were taking during COVID-19. You can see 35% said they're taking money out of their savings account. again, that's a pretty high number and scary for us. 30% reported carrying a balance on a credit card. 26% said they were delaying payments on their student loans. 17% said they were delaying payments on utilities and other household items. And 14% said they were taking money out of their retirement accounts. These are issues that we see in non-COVID times. And I think these numbers are just getting greater during COVID. So obviously, as Jamie mentioned in the onset, Pennsylvanians are struggling with student debt. Pennsylvania being ranked one of the worst when it comes to amount of debt and overall debt for our graduates and those who go into higher education. And these numbers kind of track with that. And then we see difference between white borrowers and borrowers of colors when it comes to their course of action. So delaying payments on utilities or other household expenses, there's actually an 8% difference between white borrowers and borrowers of color. Taking money out of retirement accounts, again, 12% for white borrowers, 20% for borrowers of color, that 8-point difference. And then there's a big 12-point difference between delaying payments on rent at 17% for borrowers of color and only 5% for white borrowers. 37% of borrowers reported that they are not required to make payments on their student loans right now. Obviously, that was in part due to the CARES delay through September of 2020. But you see 42% of borrowers reported paying somewhere between $1 and $299 on their student loans prior to COVID. You'll also notice there's a 1-point uptick actually before COVID and during COVID in those making payments between $100 and $199. In June, so again, this survey was done in June of this year, only 38% of borrowers reported that they were very confident that they would be able to resume payments when the deferral period ends in October. So again, the CARES deferral period ends this September unless it gets extended. So you see 38% were very confident, but then it breaks down and the other 62 aren't as confident as their peers. The 16% that are not too confident and the 11% that are not confident at all obviously are very concerning and can lead to a cliff that we could face this fall. The intensity in confidence, this broke down in an interesting way. You can see those higher earners are more confident at 43% versus lower income. So those making less than $50,000, their confidence level is 37%. But borrowers of color are actually 10% more confident than their white peers that they will be able to make those payments once we hit October. So the other issue we're facing, and we're definitely going to talk about this on a webinar tomorrow, are servicers. Servicers not providing crucial information for borrowers is obviously a huge concern for us in Pennsylvania and something that we want to work towards fixing. So this number really jumped out at us. A third of Pennsylvania borrowers, so 35%, were not aware that the CARES Act impacted their loans, and 25% of those reported they were not aware at all. That number is just way too high. So what we run into is we have borrowers who could have benefited from the CARES Act if they had known, and maybe would have had those few months where they didn't have to make payments, and that money could have went toward other very important things, right? Medicine, utilities, food, things like that. But they were unaware. And then when we get into the breakdowns, it's even more concerning. Those with lower incomes, so those with incomes under $50,000, were at a 47% level that were unaware that the CARES Act impacted student loans. And then people of color, they were at a 38% level unawareness. So again, higher than their white peer borrowers. We also looked at if folks believe that the CARES Act impacted their own student loans. So some of those could have realized, some of those surveyed could have realized that the CARES Act impacted student loans. But then we asked if they knew if it impacted their own student loans. 34% said that they did know that, but we had 37% who were unsure. And then the other 29% knew that the CARES Act did not impact their current student loans. Again, this is super concerning when we broke it down by income and by race. Borrowers of color and low-income borrowers are more likely to report that they were unsure whether the CARES Act impacted their loans. You see that people of color, that was at 57%. That's a really high number. And then those making under $50,000 were at a 49%. So you compare that to 33% of white borrowers or 34% of borrowers who are making over $75,000, you can really see those huge discrepancies which create issues. And then 31% of borrowers reported that they've had a problem that has lowered their credit. There was also a question, was there a problem that increased the overall cost of your loan or added new fees or raised your interest rate? That 25% number is high. You've probably seen in the news, some of the lawsuits going on with borrowers not acting in good faith. So that 25% number that was increasing the cost of the student loan or the increase in interest rates is obviously a concerning one. And that also plays into the server not telling the borrowers about income-based repayment plans. That polled at 24% who felt or who said their borrower or their lender did not inform them of that option. Then we're going to get into the macro impact. So among PA borrowers, 40% said they're struggling to make a student loan payment. And this was asked over the past year or two. 36% reported that they reduced the amount they're saving for retirement. 24% again delayed making a major purchase like a car. 21% have been unable to buy basic necessities like food or clothing. 15% skipped a medical appointment or getting a prescription drug to be able to make a student loan payment. So again, as we are in this terrible situation in Pennsylvania, and COVID is definitely making that problem much worse. We see these numbers of folks having to make very tough decisions, whether to pay their student loan payments or whether to make other important payments. 23% of borrowers reported knowing someone who moved to take a job that will help them afford their student loan payments. So you can see 72% did not know anyone, but of those 23%, this is a huge issue, specifically in Pennsylvania, as we see folks move out of state or move from one area to the other to get a job. So those getting college degrees or accreditations, we can see that brain drain. And some of that is being caused by not having jobs in your local area that you would make enough to pay back your student loans. So when we look at Pennsylvania student debt, this is something that we always bring up. And when we talk with legislators, it's always an important issue to create an economic environment where there's high paying jobs. So folks, after they finish or get their credentials, will be able to pay back their student loans and not have to move away from an area that they might not want to move away from. And then we'll finish with what I will say is, I guess, the good news in all of this. You heard a lot of the bad news, but there is strong support for a lot of policies. And these policies impact us either at the state level or the federal level. So this is the overall breakdown, and then I'll get into the political breakdown. But eliminating student loan interest on all federal loans had a total support at 82%. Reducing student loan debt by $20,000 for all borrowers had an 81% overall debt. Extending the monthly payment relief through September 2021. This is a huge one that we're really hoping the feds can act on, and then FIA can follow suit like they did with the CARES Act. That had a 78% total support. Debt relief for borrowers who are defrauded by for-profit schools. So we see this when for-profit colleges close and those students who are enrolled are kind of left with a bill and not a credential. Providing debt relief for those students is important. So that polled at 81% total support. Increasing the amount of federal grants was at 79%. Automatic adjusted monthly student loan payments based on income was at 79%. Having a designated office in Pennsylvania to deal with student loan complaints and enforce state law. This kind of bleeds in a little bit about folks not knowing if the CARES Act impacted them. We don't have a central resource in Pennsylvania right now where borrowers can go and ask questions and get informed about student debt. So that polled at 72% support. Extending federal student aid to incarcerated individuals. This one was the one that was under 50%, but still polled at 44% total support. And then extending federal student aid availability to Dreamers. polled at 53% total support. That was then broken down by Democrat, Independent, or Republican, and you can see in this graph still super high bipartisan support for these issues. Again, everything is on this page is polling over 50%, and you can see across political spectrums that there's still high support to do many of these things that will be a benefit to borrowers in Pennsylvania. And then this is just the last three. Again, you can see high support for that extension of payment relief through September of 2021. And then we had the Dreamers and the incarcerated individual question as well that broke down along the political spectrum. So that is the overall polling in a nutshell. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So we would be happy to answer any questions. Again, I want to thank Morning Consult and the Center for Responsible Lending for all of the hard work that they do and for being great partners in this effort. We do plan on posting the poll on our website later this week. We think this is great information to share with all of your groups or the faculty that are on the call to share with your colleagues and your students. And we also have a webinar coming up tomorrow at 5 p.m. with State Treasurer Joe Torsella, State Senator Vincent Hughes, and State Rep Jennifer O'Mara. They'll be talking about statewide solutions to these important debt problems that we just saw play out in this polling. So if there's any questions, please feel free to either raise your hand or put them into the chat box. I see Nan from Slippery Rock. Yes, we'll send faculty a link. We're actually going to put this slide deck onto the website. And as Catherine has responded, it'll also be in our AppScuff newsletter. So we encourage everyone to check the newsletter tomorrow. Check our AppScuff website. Feel free to share that link. Post the information on social media. We really see this polling as a great call to action for our state legislators and our federal folks. We are facing a cliff coming up in October if that September deadline does not get extended, where we're going to have a lot of folks in tough situations trying to pay their student loans. So we need advocacy all around the state. And then tomorrow we're going to hear about some things that our state legislators are doing in the long term that will hopefully curb some of these trends. Any other questions? And if there's any in the weeds questions, I have Nick from Morning Consult is also on, so he will be able to handle those. Jason, did you?
Yeah, how you doing, Sean?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks for the report. I have two questions. One is a little bit more related to long-term plans, and then the second is more about short-term plans. So I'll start with the short-term. How can faculty be in solidarity with students that might be losing this extension on the moratorium? I mean, I'm trying to think of how we can support our students that you mentioned are deeply concerned, rightfully so, about the end of the moratorium. So that would be one question. And then on a second question, I think I missed it, but I'm just curious, did you or the people that did the survey ask about, in light of the Sanders campaign and College for All and the way that there was a plan put forth that got some backing and seemed to have some popular support about, if you tax Wall Street, so on and so forth, you come up with a federal plan that provides states funding for free tuition, and considering that, if universities make certain reforms, and it also had universal debt abolition. So I'm just curious if you surveyed people on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. So I'll take the second question first. So this survey was just focused on debt and those type of policy solutions. But, we at AppScuff, as you know, are working, we kind of see it hand in hand, right? So Jamie mentioned the funding, things like the PA Promise, things like a statewide scholarship program. Those are, at the forefront of what we're advocating for. And that's a piece of it. We see that as kind of, stopping the bleeding and getting students graduating with way less debt. And then what this poll looked at and kind of the things that we're going to talk about tomorrow are those state solutions that are going to come in and hopefully turn the tide on debt. But there was no question on, I don't think, on total debt elimination. It was just that 20,000. Were you there for that piece? For the, okay, so there was strong support for dropping the overall debt by 20,000. And Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there was a question in there about overall elimination. And then to your first question, what can students do and what can faculty do? I think now is perfect timing to get active federally. So right now with the Senate debating kind of what this stimulus is going to look like, and if something has to go back to the House, we really need to get our Pennsylvania delegation as well as Senator Toomey on board with an extension and student debt pieces to be in that legislation. It's concerning to read some of the reports, and I think there's some folks on CR from the Center for Responsible Lending on this call who are more involved in that than I am. But it's unfortunate to see some of the articles where folks are trying to negotiate student debt pieces out or already have negotiated that out. I think you're spot on. The students are worried about this September expiration, and we also have it with FIA. FIA followed the federal suit and did the delay in the 0% interest up until September. But when that goes away, we're going to have students who may not be working, who may not have an income, having their payments come back. So I think anything we can do, calls, emails. I know Kadita's on the call. The We the People campaign has been great advocates and lobbying for the HEROES Act and things around that. So I think we need to do all we can federally to make sure our voices are heard. Any other questions either in the chat box or on the video?
Hi, my name is Jaja, and I'm a student at Westchester University for the Masters of Social Work. I just have a question in regards to potentially having financial literacy classes for students to combat the crisis with student loans.
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's something I think that gets debated at the state level quite often. And it's an interesting concept, right? I know that the state legislature is looking into how do they mandate that at the high school level. The downside for us, and I don't want to be blunt, but we are so, especially at places like Westchester and our public universities, we are so underfunded, and students are taking on such high debt that even with financial literacy, which is important, we talk to legislators that say that financial literacy is important, but when you graduate with $60,000 in debt, and you're making, a job that's making, $7.25 or $8 an hour, it's hard, even with those tools through financial literacy, it's hard to budget and make ends meet. But that is a conversation that I know our state legislators have. I don't think in the recent legislation they have debated that they mandated financial literacy, but I know they were trying to, at the high school level, make that part of the curriculum statewide.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right. So I wanted to thank everyone for hopping on. Again, this recording will possibly be available, but definitely the slides will be available on our website. And also wanted to, again, thank Morning Consult and the Center for Responsible Lending, and looking forward to working with those folks as we go into solutions. And tomorrow, again, we'll have State Treasurer Joe Torsello, State Senator Vincent Hughes, and State Rep Jennifer O'Mara to talk about things we can do on the statewide level to start addressing student debt. So thank you, everybody.